Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Prabhupada Jai Prabhupada Prabhupada Jai Prabhupada Jai Prabhupada Jai Prabhupada Prabhupada Jai Prabhupada Jai Jai Prabhupada, 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 Prabhupada. Jai Jai Prabhupada, 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 Prabhupada. Jai Vishnupad, Paramahansa, Paramahansa, Jai Status Srimad, His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada Ki. ISKCON's founder Acharya, Srila Prabhupada Ki. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki. Shri Shri Radha Radhanath Ki. Shri Giri Govardhan Ki. Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu Ki. Sankirtan Yagya Ki. Go Premanande. All glories to their Samal devotees. All glories to their Samal devotees. All glories to their Samal devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Chapter 10. Dhruva Maharaja's fight with the Yakshas. And someone will have to clarify a bit. What verse 10 is it? Anyone knows? I was told 10, starting with 10, which has no purport, then 11 and 12, which has no purport, 13, 13's got a bit of a purport. And I suppose on your sheets you have all the verses, is it? Everything. So I will just, let me see, I will read through to verse 13. We'll do verse 13 together, otherwise I'll just read the verses beginning with 10 myself. Oops. Right, so this is verse 10. Te pichamum amrishyanta padasparsham ivoraga sharar avidyan yugapad dvigunam prachikirsava. Translation: just like serpents who cannot tolerate being trampled upon by anyone's feet, the yakshas, being intolerant of the wonderful prowess of Dhruva Maharaj, threw twice as many arrows, 6 from each of their soldiers, and thus they very valiantly exhibited their prowess. Verses 11 and 12. Tata parigha nistrimshai prasashula parashvadhai shaktirishtibir bushundibish chitravajai sharairapi Abhyavarshan prakupita saratam sahasaratim ichantas tat pratikartum ayutanam trayodasha. The Yaksha soldiers were 130,000 strong, all greatly angry and all desiring to defeat the wonderful activities of Dhruva Maharaj. With full strength, they showered upon Maharaj Dhruva, along with his chariot and charioteer, various types of feathered arrows, parighas, iron bludgeons, nistrimshas, swords, prasashulas, tridents, parashvatas, lances, shaktis, pikes, rishtis, spears, and Bushundi weapons. And yes, okay, now verse 13. Otanapati sa tada shastra varshena burina na evadrishyata chana asarena yata giri autanapadi satada shastravarshena burina na evadrishyata chana asarena yatagiri autanapadi satada shastravarshena burina na evadrishyata chana asarena yatagiri autanapadi satada shastravarshena burina na evadrishyata chana asarena yatagiri. So, ladies, Autanapadi Dhruva Maharaj Sahi Tada at that time Shastravarshena by a shower of weapons Burina incessant Na not Eva certainly Adrishyata was visible Achana being covered Asarena by constant rainfall Yata as Giri a mountain. Translation: Dhruva Maharaj was completely covered by an incessant shower of weapons, just as a mountain is covered by incessant rainfall. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur points out in this connection that although Dhruva Maharaj was covered by the incessant arrows of the enemy, this does not mean that he succumbed in the battle. The example of a mountain peaks being covered by incessant rain is just suitable. For when a mountain is covered by incessant rain, all dirty things are washed from the body of the mountain. Similarly, the incessant shower of arrows from the enemy gave Dhruva Maharaj new vigor to defeat them. In other words, whatever incompetency he might have had was washed away. Autanapadi satada shastravarshena purnina na eva drishyatachana asarena yatagire. Dhruva Maharaj was completely covered by an incessant shower of weapons, just as a mountain is covered by incessant rainfall. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastutyade Deshatarne Sri Krishna Caitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadha Shivas Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindubhya eva cha, patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Yes, so this is Dhruva Maharaj's fight with the Yakshas, very dramatic situation, and there's a few interesting points here. That first of all, that Dhruva Maharaj, he was so much being attacked by 130,000 Yaksha soldiers, all of whom were greatly angry and all desiring to defeat him. And with full strength they showered upon Dhruva Maharaj and his chariot and charioteer. All these different, there's like several or even 10 or so types of weapons, various types of feathered arrows, then iron bludgeons. Not exactly sure. Maybe it's sort of like a club of some sort. Swords, tridents, lances, pikes. A pike is it's bigger than a spear. It's a relative of a spear, but bigger. And then spears, and then bushundees, which I don't know what that is. I don't think any of us do, really. We don't have a lot of experience with these things. But 130,000 of these soldiers, they're professionals, and they are just showering these things. The verse before said, every soldier, that's 130,000, was firing 6 at a time. That's about getting towards 1 million, at least 800,000 at a time. And, well, Dhruva Maharaj was completely covered by these things. But, as Prabhupada puts it, he did not succumb, which is a very gentlemanly way of saying that he wasn't killed or sort of cut into small pieces even by this fantastic quantity of deadly weapons. But rather than be killed, he became stronger. He became more inspired and excited and determined to oppose them. Prabhupada says, gave Dhruva Maharaj new vigor to defeat them. So, anyway, I think it's a very important point to just, it's difficult to really digest, but at least try to accept, is that these warriors in those days, and Dhruva Maharaj here particularly, they were able to live through, survive, and even come out the other side stronger, massive attacks, huge amounts of weaponry. And normally, perhaps one arrow would be enough for you or me. One correctly placed arrow, and that would be it. See you in the next lifetime. It would really, just one arrow, but all these weapons, including spears, very heavy weapons, and tridents, and pikes. Pikes are actually used against horses. Yeah, one of my ancestors was Robert the Bruce, the last king of independent Scotland. Scotland forever. Not really at all. Absolutely not really. But he defeated the British in the Sri Sri Radha Radhanath Sri Giri Govardhan Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu Ki Jai. He and his smaller group of Scottish warriors defeated the whole British army at the Battle of Bannockburn. I don't think many of you know much Scottish history. He defeated the British, using pikes. How's this for a bit of kind of useless information? But pikes, they in a sort of a gully, a restricted width place, the British were coming on horseback, loads of them. And the Scots put up these like walls of pikes, these big, heavy spears, sharpened at one end, but otherwise placed in the ground. And the British just ran on top of them and got slaughtered. That's a pike. They had pikes and tridents. Oh, Krishna. And they're hurling them, 100,000 of them, 6 at a time. 6 times 130,000 is 780,000. It is, isn't it? It is. And he not only survived, but he came out stronger, more vigorous, and more inspired, and like that. It's completely inconceivable by our standards. But sometimes we read of situations like this, military situations, in Srimad Bhagavatam. There's a number of such descriptions of so many deadly weapons being hurled at someone, but they survive and they come out even better. So these people, Dhruva Maharaj, of course, he's living in Satya Yuga. Right at the beginning of Satya Yuga, Dhruva Maharaj is, what is he, the great-grandson, or the great-grandson of Lord Brahma, or grandson, or Swambhuva Manu. Anyway, he's just early stages, very early stages of the first Satya Yuga, in this day of Brahma. So these people, I'm just myself preparing for Bhakti Vaibhava, and I'm actually going through the 8th chapter right at this point. And I was reading yesterday, yesterday I read that Dhruva Maharaj was referred to by the Sanskrit word manana. Manana means a man. And Srila Prabhupada, in the purport, he pointed out that this word manana is being used for Dhruva Maharaj, that he is a human. Prabhupada made that point in the purport, which I just read yesterday. So, but he, compared to humans nowadays, he's a completely different category of human. In the Satya Yuga, they lived for 100,000 years, particularly at that stage, early Satya Yuga. As Satya Yuga went on, gradually reaching Treta Yuga, then by the time Treta Yuga began, the lifespan was 10,000 years. So it's not like it's 100,000 years, and then suddenly Treta Yuga comes and suddenly it's just 10,000. There's this gradual decrease. But right at the beginning, everyone was living, it was just normal to live for 100,000 years. And that means their material bodies are just so much stronger and made of matter. It's still earth, water, fire, air, and ether. It's still these material elements, the basic elements, but of a much higher grade than what our bodies are made of. Our bodies maximum live 100 years or something like that. And generally, very few people reach 100 years. It's more like if you're in good health, if you've lived well, you may live 80 years, you might live 90. I actually read yesterday in Japan, for women, the average life expectancy now is 87. And for men, it's 80. Ladies always, on average at least, live longer than men. So, but here in South Africa, it's less. Anyway, but the point is here that Dhruva Maharaj, his body, even though it's made of at least basically the same ingredients that our bodies are made of, but his body was a much stronger version of these materials than our bodies. And so not only could he live 100,000 years, which is 1,000 times longer than we might expect to live, but he could withstand all this, the impacts of all these weapons, being hit by these huge numbers of these weapons. It's amazing, actually. But there it is. There it is. Just like we know that dogs, cows, and other, I don't know about sheep, but I know dogs and cows. Dogs, generally, if you have a dog which is 15 years old, then the dog, that's like a senior citizen dog, really. Many of them don't make it to 15. And by the time, if they live to 15, you'll see that they're grey, they have grey hair. And cows, it's more or less the same. They'll generally live to 15, but if a cow lives to 20, that's a very old cow. But their bodies are made of basically the same materials as our bodies. It's just flesh and blood and bones and a nervous system and a brain and etc. But because our bodies are made of a higher grade of those materials, our bodies just live on at least 50, 60, 70 years is just normal. But now Dhruva Maharaj, his body was of such a nature that not only could he live 1,000 times longer than any of us at the absolute maximum might live, but his body could withstand these impacts. Anyway, that's just an interesting little point. But then the second point is that not only could his body withstand the impact of all these weapons, but, as Prabhupada says, well, he developed a new vigor. Vigor normally refers to a physical condition, and whatever incompetency he might have had was washed away by the impact of all those weapons. And the example given is just like a mountain peak. If there's very heavy rain on a mountain peak, then whatever dirt and so on may have accumulated there just gets washed away by the heavy rain, and in this way the mountain peak becomes sort of effulgent and just refreshed looking. It's like that. And Srila Prabhupada, well, Shastra on a number of occasions talks about, well, there's a chapter actually in the 10th canto of the description of autumn, and the description there is that during the rainy season, because particularly in those days, even in nowadays, although it's not as sort of rigidly fixed as it was, but there used to be a rainy season, and even now there is more or less a rainy season, you could say, in India. And there in that chapter of the 10th canto, it's described how during the rainy season there's so much rain, and the rain washes dirt down into rivers, into lakes and little ponds and different bodies of water. So at the end of the rainy season, they're all dirty. They're all dirty because all the water, the force of the heavy rain, monsoon rain, just washes all the dirt down into wherever it will reach. So, but then in autumn, there are very gentle rains. And the effect of the gentle rains is that these rivers and lakes and ponds and kunds, they become cleansed. And so they're very nice and clear, and they just look very nice like that. So the principle here with the mountain is the same. And of course the idea is that the example of the mountain is given to illustrate the situation with Dhruva Maharaj, that the same thing happened to him. He came out of all of this sort of, you could say, invigorated, and whatever incompetency, I don't know exactly what the idea is there, but any possible hesitation perhaps was washed away, and therefore he is about to get back into it even more. One man versus 130,000. What can you say? Hare Krishna. Dasarath, Lord Ramachandra's father, was celebrated because he could defeat 10 chariots. That's what it means, Dasarath, like Ratha Yatra, and Das means 10. He could defeat single-handedly 10 warriors, each of whom had their own chariot. Means they were at a great advantage. But he could defeat them. In fact, he did. He actually did that. And then after he had done that in some battle, then as a type of appreciation or glorification, he was given the name Dasarath to glorify him, celebrate him as a great warrior. So anyway, there is an application here, though, for ourselves in terms of our efforts, attempts in Krishna consciousness. In fact, we mentioned, I think last week sometime, that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati said that as gold is purified by fire, means that gold, at least oftentimes, when it's extracted from the ground, particularly when it's extracted from really under the ground, then gold, when it comes out, it's black. It's black. But then what they do, of course, now they just use chemicals, but it's the same sort of principle of fire. The chemicals burn burn the black rock and burn away the impurities, and you're left with actual gold, like effulgent, brilliant gold. And traditionally, they would literally use fire to purify the gold and bring it to the state of being golden. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta said like that as gold is purified by fire, then the devotee is purified by the fire of ordeal. Ordeal, of course, means being under some considerable pressure and placed in a difficult situation. But if one takes shelter of the Lord, if one takes shelter of the spiritual master, if one takes shelter of the Lord, if one takes shelter of the holy names, if one takes shelter of the process of devotional service, then even in such a situation, not only can one come through without being sort of beaten down and defeated and just one's position in Krishna consciousness becoming lessened, but one can actually come through strengthened, inspired, and excited and appreciative of Krishna consciousness so much more. So therefore, when devotees experience difficulties, when they experience tests, well, we've mentioned on a number of occasions before, Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj said on a number of occasions, he would say, when I see a test coming to me in my Krishna consciousness, I think, here comes Krishna in the form of the test, of a test. So he said he would feel excited. He wouldn't feel like, oh no, what's happening now? He would feel excited, and he would embrace it in that mood, with that attitude. And I mean, basically always he would be enlivened and excited, and he would come out successful. So, therefore, for devotees, when tests and challenges and difficulties come, whereas the materialists will definitely think that, oh no, some problem, oh gosh, what is going to happen, and so on and so forth like that. And, be defeated from the outset. Just be defeated by thinking about the test, what to speak of trying to deal with it. Yes, but the devotee is not like that. The devotee is helped by the test. The devotee is able to improve and advance as a devotee through accepting the test. And therefore we find famous verse, extremely famous verse, and really extremely important verse, which actually we read last week Sunday in our Nectar of Devotion program here. 10th canto, chapter 14, verse 8, Srimad Bhagavatam, Tatenu kampam susamikshamano bunjana evatma kritam vipakam hridvagvapobir vidadam namaste jivetayo mukti pade sadaya bhak. My dear Lord, one who earnestly waits for you to bestow your causeless mercy upon him, all the while patiently suffering the reactions of his past misdeeds, and offering you respectful obeisances with his heart, words, and body, is surely eligible for liberation, for it has become his rightful claim. And Srila Prabhupada, of course, didn't. The last part of the Bhagavatam he translated and commented on was the previous chapter 13. So he didn't exactly give a purport to this, but in Nectar of Devotion, where this verse appears in the 10th chapter, Prabhupada does give a purport, and it's just an amazing and wonderful purport. And just about the first thing, one of the things Prabhupada says is, this verse should be the solace for all devotees. Means all the devotees, we should all really sort of take shelter of this verse and the meaning, the understanding of this verse, and apply it. And it'll be a great source of success for us in our Krishna consciousness. And if we do like what was said there, then Jivetiyo Mukti Pade Sadayabak, then one will surely be eligible for liberation, or most specifically, going back to Godhead, for it becomes your rightful claim, if you do like that. So that's really nice. As a mountain peak becomes sort of cleansed and purified, and even you could say sort of invigorated by heavy rain, all the vegetation grows and becomes more sort of vitalized by heavy rain. So Dhruva Maharaj, as a warrior, became revitalized and inspired by the heavy attack, and the devotees also, at least if the devotees are properly situated, then the devotees, when there's some challenge, then the devotees also become inspired, and it helps them progress through inspiration to take shelter and make all efforts under the shelter, with the confidence that by the grace of the Lord, if I try my best in the mood of shelter, then whatever the result may be, if I'm successful, if I'm not successful in the usual types of material terms, ways of evaluating, but whatever the result, it'll be Krishna's mercy, it'll be the best thing for me. And as opposed, if one just has an easy life in Krishna consciousness, just an easy life, just Mahaprasadam 6 times a day, and getting plenty of rest at night, so, like that, and not having too much to do because, we don't want to get tired. But an easy life is not really conducive for Krishna consciousness. Better, a more intensive type of way of life. And Tribhuvanath Prabhu, I've also mentioned a few times, Tribhuvanath Prabhu, the late great devotee, he told me personally that he asked Srila Prabhupada that, will Krishna ever give a devotee a test which is so difficult that the devotee just will not be able to pass the test and will just be sort of smashed or defeated. And he said that Srila Prabhupada told him, no, Krishna will never give that sort of test. So therefore one can have confidence in Krishna like that, that if the Lord, or not if, but when, the Lord places me in some intense type of situation, if I really take shelter in the right ways and the best ways from the heart, then by the grace of the Lord, the devotees, the spiritual master, and the process, and the holy names, I'll come out the other side successful, or at least whatever the result will be, it'll be for the best for me, by mercy. And therefore, I want just to read something to you. It's just a couple of sentences, which actually you all, or we all, read some weeks ago, because it's from the 8th chapter of the 4th canto. That's where I'm up to in preparing for the Bhakti Vaibhava. But it is the 8th chapter as Dhruva Maharaj leaves home for the forest, and it's the chapter in which Dhruva has his bad experience with his sort of stepmother, or whatever you'd call her, the co-wife of his mother, and just becomes terribly insulted. and you all know the story. So he decides that he's just going to somehow teach them a lesson. So he goes immediately after the actual incident, he goes to his mother, and he is just distraught, and she also becomes distraught. And anyway, she advises him to take shelter of the Lord. So here, this is from Srila Prabhupada, and Srila Prabhupada, whatever he says, going through all these verses and purports, like basically every day, it's so amazing, so revealing. The consciousness of Srila Prabhupada, I mean, depending on our capacity to really appreciate it, but some of the things he says are just so deep and profound. It's amazing. So this really struck me just yesterday, actually. So Queen Suniti advised her son that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is known as Bhritya Vatsala, which indicates that he's very kind to his devotees. Bhritya means devotee, and Vatsala means very merciful, very dear. And she said to Dhruva, Prabhupada saying, "You came to me crying, having been insulted by your stepmother, but I'm unable to do any good for you. But Krishna is so kind to his devotees that if you go to him, then the combined kindness of millions of mothers like me will be surpassed by his affectionate and tender dealings. When everyone else fails to mitigate one's misery, Krishna is able to help the devotee." So it really struck me, and particularly the combined kindness of millions of mothers. Millions. I mean, she is just, Suniti, just absolutely sold out to her son, to Dhruva, and just completely overflowing with love and kindness and well wishes and desire to help. And that's quite something, to have a mother like that. That is really quite something. But the combined kindness of millions of mothers like me. Krishna's so kind. He will be that kind. The combined kindness of millions of mothers like me will be surpassed by his affectionate and tender dealings. Yes. So really that's the case. And for the devotees that's the case. That there's so much mercy available from Krishna. We can basically not, we certainly can't understand the extent of it. We can hardly begin to understand a little bit of it, but it's there. And if we apply ourselves in the right ways in Krishna consciousness, then more and more will come, and more we'll appreciate how more and more can come and will come. And in this way, Krishna consciousness we experience is just so wonderful, and even more wonderful, much more wonderful than we expected, or even much more wonderful than we hoped for. It's really like that. So anyway, Dhruva and his situation, what can you say? What sort of person? He's still a human. Prabhupada, as I mentioned, Prabhupada makes the point. He is a human. He's not like Superman or some sort of super being. He's actually part of the human species. But he is in a different category from us. Therefore he can withstand this incredible attack, and not just withstand it, but come out enlivened and empowered further by it, by the mercy that he's getting. Hare Krishna. Any comments or questions? Srup Damodar Prabhu, words of wisdom or anything?
Hare Krishna Maharaj. Is it audible enough?
Barely, but a little. If you speak loud.
Maharaj, thank you for that class. It was really, really insightful. How would you define a test in a devotee's life? I mean, it's like, we want to develop a relationship with Krishna, and the thought that a devotee is constantly being given tests by Krishna with that person that you're trying to develop a relationship with sometimes can seem uninspiring. Like,
sure.
And if I want to develop some relationship with someone, does it constantly have to be like I'm jumping through hoops or climbing over walls? And Krishna seems to be one after the other supplying tests. So how would you define a test? Is everything that we go through as a devotee a test from Krishna, or are there other experiences?
Well, that's a sort of multifaceted, what you've said. But what is a test for one devotee is just nothing for another devotee. For one devotee to be in charge of one other devotee may be too much. They may actually not be able to do it. But for another devotee to be in charge of 100 devotees or 1,000 may just be, so it depends on the devotee, but I think that's an important consideration. It depends on the devotee. So Krishna and Krishna consciousness being very personal. Well, Krishna consciousness being very personal because Krishna is very personal. Generally, I would say, in the general sense, a test is something kind of personalized for us as individuals. And but it would be something which will sort of challenge us. It'll sort of require more from us in terms of Krishna consciousness than we might normally be displaying, or like that, something like that. And sometimes there may be it may be like quite a bit more than we would normally be displaying. And then we think, wow, what is the situation I'm in? What am I meant to do? So I think these are important considerations. But the thing is, they are for our betterment. They are for our betterment. Yes. So the thing is that if we don't become bettered in, actually quite a lot of ways, then we are not going to be capable of having a loving relationship with Krishna. We're only going to be capable of a type of relationship which is not really loving. Like people who are materialistic and they're expecting something from God. So if we don't become purified of that type of tendency, even maybe we're not exactly like materialistic in that sense on a regular basis, but generally many of us, or all of us, or definitely many of us, we have those tendencies. Old habits die hard, that we can become sort of, some material attitudes can come up in the course of our devotional service. So we need to whatever degree that might be true, which will depend on the devotee, but we need to get free from even like these subtle things, so that and otherwise we won't be able to develop a relationship with Krishna which is really of a truly loving nature. It'll always be limited by our tendencies to sort of get diverted into a material type of, even subtle material consciousness under certain circumstances. There's the story of Sridham, which it's kind of a folk story really, from Bandiravan, of how Krishna told him I'm coming back, I'm going to Mathura, but I'm coming back, just wait here. You know that story? Yeah, just wait. And Sridham said, well, I just got this feeling you're not coming back. And Krishna said, no, just wait here, you'll see. But Krishna didn't come back. He said he'd be back the next day, or at least the day after that, but he didn't. And he didn't come back after a week, or even a month, or 3 months, or 6, or a year. Eventually, as the story goes, Krishna came back 450 years later as Lord Caitanya, and Sridham had turned into a deity. And Krishna embraced him and said, see, I told you I'd come back. Or Lord Caitanya embraced him. I told you I'd come back. That sort of perseverance in Krishna consciousness is only possible in a purified state. Otherwise, if one is just partially purified, which, generally the devotees are partially purified. They're not just like the materialists, but they're not like the very elevated devotees. So some perseverance is there, but then there's a breaking point. So we need to go through these types of experiences and challenges and if we apply ourselves in these ways, then gradually it'll bring more and more of the actual best out from within us. And not just, some mental capabilities or even intellectual capabilities, but actually from the spiritual level, our spiritual nature will manifest, or step by step manifest. So therefore, these tests are mercy. Because if we don't go through them, they're part of the program. One other part is just carry on chanting. And if you just carry on, you just become purified more and more and more. But another part of the program is you got to face challenges. So when you put them all together, then the end result is you become a person who Krishna is not just willing to have, but insists on having with him in the kingdom of God. And that's what Prabhupada says. It's in the class Srila Prabhupada gives on verses 13 and 14 of the 12th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. You can look it up. There's only one class on those two verses together. And Prabhupada, 12th chapter, it means those verses where Krishna says, if my devotee is like this and that, and there's usually about 5 or 6 things, then he's very dear to me. So Prabhupada begins the class by saying, yes, this is Krishna consciousness. How will Krishna love me? In other words, how will I become such a person that Krishna will love me and I'll be capable of having a loving relationship with him, rather than some other type of relationship which there may be some mixed elements in them. How does that sound? Hare Krishna.
I was thinking about one exchange with Prabhupada and His Holiness Bhakti Swarup Damodar Maharaj.
Bhakti?
Swarup Damodar Maharaj.
Oh, okay.
From the BI. He was a brahmachari then, and he was sort of expressing to Prabhupada that you have given me one department, this Bhaktivedanta Institute, and I find it so difficult to manage because there's so many problems I have to deal with. And when I think of you, Prabhupada, you have the whole institution. How many problems you must be dealing with? And Prabhupada said to him, problems? What problems? I don't see any problems. I just see service to my Guru Maharaj. So that, it was an interesting thing how Prabhupada saw whatever was coming to him as a way to relate with his spiritual master and Krishna.
That's very nice. And another thing, in a related vein, one devotee, is little famous conversation, I've actually got a recording of it. He says, Prabhupada, how do we become attentive while we're chanting? Because the mind, it's very difficult. So how do we really chant attentively? And Prabhupada says, what problem? Just chant and hear. That's all. What is the question of mind? You just chant and you hear the chanting. That's all. But anyway, that's a good one. Yeah. Okay, Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.